I found the neighbor's note tucked under my windshield wiper on a Tuesday morning in January, and I almost threw it away without reading it. That was 3 months before my son tried to take everything I had. Let me back up. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working for the city of Sudbury. Roads department, maintenance. The kind of work that leaves your hands rough and your knees bad by the time you're 50. When I retired, my wife Elaine and I had one plan. Sell the house in town, buy the property her father left her outside Chelmsford, fix it up proper, and live the rest of our lives with some quiet around us. 22 acres, a woodlot at the back, a creek that freezes solid by November. We'd talked about it for years. Elaine died 11 months before we got to do any of it. Pancreatic cancer, 63 years old. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis. I won't say more than that, because even now, 3 years later, I can't write about those 4 months without my chest going tight in a way that makes me feel like I'm 80. I moved to the Chelmsford property alone. My son, I'll call him my son the way you call a storm, just to name what it is. My son thought I shouldn't. He said the place was too far from town, too much work for one person, too isolated. He drove out one Sunday in October and walked around looking at the fence posts and the old barn roof and shook his head the way men do when they've already decided something. "Dad," he said, "have you thought about what happens if you fall? Nobody's going to hear you out here." I told him I'd been not falling for 67 years and I thought I could manage. His name is Curtis. He's 41, works in commercial real estate in North Bay. Married a woman named Tara about 6 years ago. She has the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes, the kind you notice after a while but can't explain to anyone who hasn't seen it themselves. I never said anything to Elaine about it. You don't say things like that about your son's wife without proof. I moved to Chelmsford in November. I spent the winter learning the property, where the water pools after a thaw, which sections of fence needed replacing, how long the wood stove in the main room takes to heat the whole house if you get it going by 5 in the morning. I was lonely. I won't pretend otherwise, but there's a difference between lonely and lost, and I knew which one I was. My nearest neighbor was a retired schoolteacher named Bonnie, who lived about 400 meters up the road. We'd waved a few times. She'd left a loaf of bread on my porch around Christmas with a card that said, "Welcome to the road." I thought that was kind, and I wrote her a thank you note and left it in her mailbox. We were friendly without being friends yet. You take time to know people out here. That's not coldness, that's just how it's done. The note on my windshield that January morning was in her handwriting, neat and small, the way people who spent decades writing on blackboards tend to write. "Come for coffee when you have a moment. No rush. Just want to show you something." I went that afternoon. She lived in a bungalow with a mudroom full of rubber boots and cross-country skis and a kitchen that smelled like something with cinnamon had recently happened in it. She poured coffee without asking how I took it, just black, which was right, and set a plate of shortbread between us and sat down across the table. "I don't want to be the kind of neighbor who puts their nose in," she said. "But?" I said. "But I've lived on this road for 34 years, she said, "and I know what it looks like when someone is casing a property." She told me she'd noticed a car on the road twice in the past 2 weeks, parking just past my driveway, sitting there for 20-30 minutes. Not county vehicles, not a truck she recognized, a newer SUV, dark blue. Could be nothing, she said. Could be someone who pulls over to use their phone. But the second time I walked down to get my mail, I noticed the engine was running, and whoever was inside didn't want to be looked at, turned their face away. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Did you get the plate?" I asked. She had. She'd written it on a piece of paper that she slid across the table. I looked at it. I said, "Thank you, Bonnie," she said. "You have family? Anyone who'd have reason to be checking on the place?" I said I had a son in North Bay. She looked at me the way people look at you when they're being careful with you. "All right," she said. "Well, you know where I am." I drove home and I sat in the kitchen and I looked at the plate number on that piece of paper for a long time. Then I got up and I went to the filing cabinet in the spare room, the one where I keep Elaine's documents, the property deed, her father's will, our own wills, the insurance papers. Everything was there. Everything looked the same. But something had shifted in me, a kind of attention I hadn't been paying before. I started paying it now. In February, Curtis called to say he and Tara were thinking of coming for a visit. "Check in on you," he said. Make sure you're set up okay for the rest of winter. I said that was fine. They arrived on a Friday evening. Tara had brought a casserole, chicken and rice, and she reheated it while Curtis walked around the property in the last of the daylight. I watched him from the kitchen window. He wasn't walking the way you walk when you're interested in a place. He was walking the way you walk when you're estimating something. At dinner, Tara talked more than usual. She asked about the will. Not directly. She did it the way people do it when they think they're being subtle. Wrapped it in something else, some conversation about a friend of hers whose father had passed away, and how complicated the estate had been, because there was no clear documentation. What a shame. What a headache for the family. Then, setting her fork down, Curtis mentioned your wife's father left this property to her and then to you. Is all of that documented properly? With a lawyer and everything? I said it was. Because we just want to make sure, if anything ever happened to you, there wouldn't be confusion, she said. For Curtis's sake, you know. He's the only heir. I looked at her. I looked at Curtis. He was looking at his plate. That's a kind thought, I said. After dinner, Curtis brought up the idea of me signing a power of attorney. He said it was just smart planning. He knew a notary in North Bay who could handle it quickly, no fuss. It would just mean that if you ever got sick or couldn't make decisions for yourself, I could manage things without a legal mess. I said I'd think about it. I did not tell them that I had, 3 years ago, already set up a power of attorney with a lawyer in Sudbury named Dennis, who'd handled Elaine's estate and who I trusted completely. I did not tell them that Dennis had already advised me, during that process, that if anyone ever pushed me on financial decisions, I should call him first and say nothing until I did. I also did not tell them that the dark blue SUV Bonnie had described was registered, as I'd found out through a friend at the city who still had contacts with the licensing office, to a numbered company in North Bay, a company I looked up and found had been incorporated 18 months earlier, with Curtis listed as a director. I slept fine that night. I've always been able to sleep. Elaine used to say it was my greatest talent and my most irritating quality. In March, I had a conversation with Dennis in Sudbury. I drove down on a Wednesday and sat in his office and told him everything. The car, the dinner conversation, the POA request, the numbered company. Dennis is the kind of lawyer who doesn't react to things. He just listens and writes in a small notebook and then tells you what the situation actually is. He told me the situation was that I had a son who appeared to be positioning himself to contest the property, and possibly to establish a pattern of my needing assistance that could be used to challenge my legal competency. The power of attorney request was the key piece. If I had signed it, even under a reputable notary, I would have handed Curtis significant legal leverage over the estate. You didn't sign it, Dennis said. No, I said. Good, he said. Don't sign anything without calling me. Not a renewal, not a form, nothing that comes with a pen attached. He suggested I update my will explicitly, add a clause that addressed any future competency challenges, and document the interactions I'd had. He also suggested I contact the Ontario Provincial Police non-emergency line just to create a record about the vehicle, without making accusations. I did all of it. I drove home through the kind of late winter afternoon we get up here. Sky going gray and orange at the edges. Snow on the fields hard and blue in the shadows. I thought about my son. I thought about how I used to take him fishing out at Windy Lake when he was 8, 9 years old. How he'd lose patience after 20 minutes and want to go back. How I'd let him sit in the truck and listen to the radio while I finished. How that seemed fine then, just a kid being a kid. I wondered when the patience ran out for good. The visit in April started normally. Curtis came alone this time, said Tara had a work thing. He seemed easier without her, more like himself, and for a few hours I thought maybe I'd gotten it wrong. We had lunch, talked about hockey. He still followed the Leafs the way I'd raised him to, helplessly, and he helped me replace 2 fence posts along the back field in the afternoon. He worked hard. He always did work hard when it was physical. I'll give him that. Then in the evening, after dinner, he brought out a folder, documents inside. He set them on the kitchen table, the way you set something down when you've rehearsed the moment. Dad, he said, I've had a property lawyer look at this. There's a mechanism, it's called a family property trust, where you could transfer the deed into a trust managed by the family, which would protect it from probate and estate taxes and make everything smoother down the road. I looked at the documents. They were real. They'd been prepared by an actual firm. And who manages the trust? I asked. I would, he said, as trustee. You'd still live here. Nothing changes for you, I said. So I would sign over the deed into the trust, he said, which protects it. I said, let me read through these properly. I want to understand them, he said. Of course, take your time. I took them to the spare room and I closed the door and I called Dennis. I described what I was looking at. Dennis listened and said, do not sign those documents. That trust structure, with him as sole trustee and no co-trustee or oversight mechanism, would give him effective control of the property while you're alive and full control at death, entirely outside your will. It's not illegal, but it's designed to sidestep what your will says. I went back to the kitchen. Curtis was washing the dinner dishes. He'd always done that, cleared up after himself. That was Elaine's doing. I'm going to have Dennis look at these before I do anything, I said. He turned from the sink. Dennis, my lawyer in Sudbury. He handled your mother's estate. Something moved across Curtis's face. Not anger exactly, more like recalculation. That's fine, he said. That's the right thing to do. He left the next morning. He took the documents with him. That was the last time he tried anything with paper. What came next was slower, more like weather than a plan. Something that builds without you seeing it clearly until it's already on top of you. Over May and June, I noticed things, small things. A charge on my credit card I didn't recognize. $14. A subscription to something I'd never heard of. I called the number and it was a software service and they said the account had been set up with my email address. I canceled it and thought nothing more of it. Then there was a letter from Service Canada that seemed to reference a change to my direct deposit information. My pension payments that I hadn't made. I called Service Canada. They said someone had attempted to update the banking information on my account in April, but the request had been flagged and not processed because it didn't pass their verification. I called Dennis and told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we need to go to the OPP, not the non-emergency line this time. I did. I drove to the detachment in Chelmsford and I sat across from a constable named Whitfield, who had the particular expression of someone who has heard a lot of things that surprised him and has decided to stop being surprised. I told him everything from the beginning. He took notes. He asked careful questions. At the end, he said he couldn't promise anything specific, but that what I was describing, the property trust attempt, the financial account access attempt, constituted grounds for an investigation. He took Curtis's name. He took the numbered company registration I'd printed. He took Bonnie's plate record. Driving home, I stopped at Bonnie's. She was in her garden, which in June up here means she was mostly just looking at the soil with optimism. I told her what was happening, not all of it, but enough. She listened without interrupting, which is a rarer quality than people think. When I finished, she said, do you need anything? I said I thought I was all right. She said, I've got a brother who's a retired Crown attorney. If you want someone to look at documents informally, he's the kind of person who does that. I said I might take her up on that. She said, you know what your wife's father told me once? Years ago, when I first moved here. He said the land knows who belongs to it. Not in a mystical way. He just meant that people who are right for a place take care of it. And people who aren't, you can tell. I stood there in her driveway for a moment. He was a good man, I said. He was, she said. I went home. The OPP investigation moved the way investigations move, slowly, and without telling you much. Constable Whitfield called me twice over the summer, with updates that were not quite updates, more like confirmations that things were continuing. I kept tending the property. I fixed the barn roof in July with help from a man named Pete who did odd jobs around the area, and who didn't talk more than necessary, which I respected. I cleared deadfall from the woodlot. I put up a deer fence along the east side of the garden. In late August, Curtis called. He sounded different from how he'd sounded in April. Careful, the way people sound when someone has told them to be careful. Dad, he said, I want to apologize for how things have been. I said, okay, I got some bad advice, he said. About the trust, I was worried about you, about the property. I think I went about it wrong. I said, I appreciate you saying that. He said, can we start over? I said, we'll see, son. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while. The evening was coming in over the field, the light going gold the way it does up here in August, flat and wide and very clear. A pair of sandhill cranes were working the far edge of the creek. I'd been watching those two all summer. They come back every year, the same pair, or what I decide is the same pair, because it's nicer to think so. I found out in September what had happened on Curtis's end. Not from him, from Constable Whitfield, who called to let me know that the investigation had resulted in a conversation with Curtis and his lawyer, that the numbered company had been dissolved, and that Curtis had provided assurances, with some legal weight attached, that he would not pursue any further action regarding the property. There was no charge laid. There wasn't quite enough for that, but there was enough that Curtis knew the door was closed, and closed in a way that would be noticed if he tried to open it again. Whitfield said, "I want to be clear that this doesn't mean nothing could happen in the future. You should keep your documentation current and maintain your relationship with your lawyer." I said I would. He said, "And for what it's worth, you did everything right. Coming in when you did, with the records you had. A lot of people wait too long." I thought about that after I hung up, about what waiting too long looks like, about Bonnie walking down to her mailbox and writing down a plate number because something felt off, about Dennis saying don't sign anything without calling me with that flat certainty of his, about Elaine's father saying the land knows who belongs to it. I don't know what Curtis is now. He's my son. He's also someone who tried, carefully and over months, to take what his mother and her father built, and what I have been trying to deserve. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I've stopped trying to make one of them less true than the other. What I know is this: I'm still here. I got the barn roof sorted. The garden gave me more zucchini than I could use, and I left bags of it at Bonnie's gate all summer, and she returned the containers with jam in them. The cranes came back in the spring. The wood stove in the main room, if you get it going by 5 in the morning, heats the whole house fine. Some mornings I walk out and stand at the edge of the woodlot in the early light, when the frost is still on the grass, and the trees are just shapes against the sky, and I think about how close it came. How a signature on a page on an ordinary evening could have changed everything. Then I go in and make coffee and I get on with the day. That's what you do.